Okay. Oops. There we go. So where we left off was, what are the remedies? So before I show the slide, what might you think, sorry, I'm in a t-shirt, it's just too hot. What might you think is the biggest remedy that the capital partner wants to have vis-a-vis the operating partner if they do this bad behavior? Miles.
Is it the removal of the operating partner?
Removal having the effect of what more specifically? So
The loss of the promote?
Loss of the promote, right. Holding the promote at risk is of real critical importance. Okay. So you do remove them as the manager, you take them out of their decision-making authority. You take away their promote. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that negotiation. Okay. Operating partner says, okay, I did a bad act. Maybe it's not theft. Maybe it's one of these other provisions. But is it really fair? And let's say if we sold the asset today, I would be due to receive 20 million of promote. Okay. Is it really fair that I should lose all that value that I've built through all my good behavior through that date? Okay. And so sometimes what you see is you say, okay, you're not going to, I have to bring somebody else in to finish the job. I'm sitting in San Francisco. I don't know how to operate an office building in Charlotte. So I'm going to have to incentivize the next person. I'm going to have to give them a promote. So here's what we'll do. We'll figure out what your promote's worth today based on appraisals and flowing through the waterfall and hypothetical closing costs and all those things. And we'll set that to the side. And I will incentivize the new person who creates value from this point forward. And so when the asset's ultimately sold, you will sort of locked in to that promote, which existed on the day that I fired you. And to the extent there's value, you'll get it up to that amount. And if there's promote above that level, it'll go to the new partner. So you might get into a negotiation around that provision. Okay. Let's say your partner did a really bad act, committed a felony, stole money, right? Maybe you don't even want him you don't even want to be associated with it. Okay. So in that scenario, you might have the right to buy them out of the deal. Again, same idea. You value the assets. It's not a buy-sell. Not a buy-sell. Neither of these are. You value the assets based on appraisals. You come up with what the assets are worth based on appraisals. You figure out what the operating partner would get through the waterfall, and you can actually just buy them out at that price. And when you calculate that waterfall, depending on the nature of the bad act, maybe it includes the promote, or maybe it's determined without regard to the promote. So if it's a 90-10 deal, there's no promote. It's basically just 10% of the cash flow. There's no promote component because they did a bad act. And maybe they did a bad act. Not only can you get rid of the promote because they're making you buy them out because you can't be partners with a bad actor. Okay, maybe the non-defaulting capital partner in this example can buy them that terrible operating partner out at a discount. So if you sold the assets for $1 million, you'd get $10. I can buy you out for $8. It's sort of the penalty for doing the bad act. So that's another remedy. Another remedy is maybe the non-defaulting member had a right to trigger a sale, but there was a time frame. Nobody could trigger a sale for 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. So, but if somebody does a bad act, that other partner's rights to take that action accelerates, shoots forward. So instead of having to wait 3, 5, or 10 years in that example, you could do it right away. You could just sell the asset, okay? You certainly take away any voting rights of the defaulting partner. You terminate any affiliate contracts. So some or all of those remedies would be available typically to a non-defaulting partner vis-a-vis a defaulting partner. Big part of the negotiation of these documents. Questions? You can buy them out, you can take away their promote, you can remove them as the operating member, you take away their voting, cancel their affiliate contracts, right? All those kinds of things. Some or all of those combined. Okay. Restrictive covenants. Remember, one kind of joint venture is a programmatic joint venture. Do folks remember what a programmatic joint venture is? Somebody want to say it out loud? Ed?
When you're not just buying a single building, when you might be doing, like, continuing to perhaps buy assets.
Yeah, the business plan of the partnership is to go out and find self-storage assets in infill locations in major metropolitan markets in the Northeast. That's your business plan. And your partner, somehow, some way, since they were in third grade, she always wanted to be the self-storage guru. So she knows all the relationships. So you form this partnership. And the idea is she's going to keep showing you these deals over time. Okay. And you, the capital partner, maybe you don't want to do all of them, or maybe you do. But the point is that the deal is the operating partner, in this case, has to show to the capital partner any deal that she would like to do in this space. And only if and when the capital partner says no, is the operating partner permitted to do it outside the venture. Okay. Maybe this will be for an investment period. Maybe it'll be until a certain amount of capital is expended. Maybe it'll only be, and I gave you a bunch of criteria: self-storage, infill locations, major metropolitan markets in the Northeast. Maybe there's more, which pro forma out to a 10% return, which require capital of more than 5 million, but not less than 20 million. I mean, you can create a box, an investment box. And the broader the box, the more deals the operating partner needs to show the capital partner. And the tighter the box, the fewer deals the operating partner has to show the capital partner. Okay. But that's a key component of a programmatic joint venture. Okay. Now, as I just mentioned, in the context of a programmatic venture or otherwise, you might say, even outside of programmatic venture, you might say to your partner, look, I know you're big in the multifamily space. We're buying this apartment building together in Indianapolis. Or a better example is we're buying a retail building, an office building, lab life science building. Even though it may not be programmatic, but this is the deal. You can't own or have any interest in a competitive project within 5 miles or 10 miles, right? Because I don't want, you know everything about this building and my rents and my business plan. And I don't want you to own a competitive asset, in the area, a truly competitive asset. So part of doing the business in this context with the share partner, with the capital partner, is the operating partner agreeing they won't have any interest in a competitive project within a particular radius. Okay. Key persons. It may be really important to the deal that the person you're negotiating with or someone in that organization, they may really have the secret sauce that gives the operating partner that you're negotiating with a competitive edge, is the reason why you're paying a big promote. So you may have obligations and requirements that person control the vehicle, devote a certain amount of time to the vehicle, right? And really be the person in charge, so that that the person with the real secret sauce is the one who's in the deal with you, and you're not getting stuck with the unhelpful son-in-law. Okay? So those are important provisions. Duties. You can opt in or out of fiduciary duties in an LLC in Delaware as you see fit. Most deals we see waive fiduciary duties generally, but you will still see some specific kinds of items included. So you definitely will waive duty of loyalty. You typically will waive duty of care. There will be no duty of disclosure, but what you do see are more specific contractual provisions like express prohibitions on self-dealing. So you can't engage in transactions with yourself or your affiliates so as to ensure that transactions you do are, arm's length, on an arm's length basis, okay? But so that's a typical approach. Not every deal, but typically those fiduciary duties are waived, okay? Now you're in, how do you get out? Okay. Critically important. Why is it so important? One, if an operating partner is stuck in a deal for really long, what happens to their promote? It's kind of a hard question. We talked about it last week. How does it impact the promote, I should say? Bonus points for somebody. Henry.
Since IRR is a function of time, the longer the venture goes on, the worse the promote will be.
Right. Operating partner doesn't want to be stuck in a deal for a long period of time. There's all that capital, which is in the deal, is ticking at an IRR, just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And since you're not going to get to your promote until your capital partner's gotten their money back with a minimum IRR, or the agreed upon minimum IRR, the bigger that number grows to, the tougher it is to receive, the harder it will be to earn a larger promote. Every dollar that goes towards the IRR is a dollar not available to pay the promote. People understand that? Again, if you go back to the slide I gave, if the amount to go from 5 million from a 10%, from getting your money back to a 10% IRR, right, was, in that example, I think it was $1 million. If because of time that number was 4 million, you could see there'd be that much less money to keep throwing through the waterfall and being available to pay promote. So operating partners like to be able to get out of deals. They want to be able to force an exit. And remember, the capital partner, they probably want to get out too, but they like optionality. They probably want to sell. They've got a fun life. They can't be in these deals forever, but they get worried about a 10% partner dictating when they have to exit the deal. So a big negotiation is, how will exit work? Can the operating partner dictate to the capital partner that a sale must occur? Can the capital partner simply ignore the request of the operating partner and have full control? And how do you manage those competing, reasonable but competing requirements? Okay, so one thing you could do is you could say, look, after 5 years, we're going to sell the asset. That's our business plan going. Okay. Now, the capital partner probably won't end it there. That's probably not something they want to do. So they say, look, we'll sell after 5 years, but if I want to stay in the deal, I don't think it's a good time to get out. I can effectively buy you out of the deal for what you would have received on a sale at that time. Or we'll go to market, or I, the capital partner, will tell you what I think it's worth. I think the asset's worth $1 billion, and you, the operating partner, can buy me out. Or said the other way, the operating partner can just buy the capital partner. Either way, you try and come up with a price mechanism which protects the party that wants to stay in to have the option to stay in if they're willing to buy out the other partner based on those valuations. So that's like this put call point that I have here. Similarly, you could say, you know what, we're just going to go to market. And if the price, and someone is going to set a price. And as long as the price in the market is above that number, then the parties agree they'll sell. But if the price is below that number, then the parties agree they're going to, that the market dictates, then the parties will not sell. So there's just a variety of ways in which the parties up front should be thinking about how they exit the deal so that both sides are not in an uncomfortable situation on something that they didn't think about up front. Okay, so pretty typical negotiation. Operating partners typically want to not be in deals forever. Capital partners typically want to be able to control exit and not sell at a bad time. And so you come up with, you could just also do a buy sell if there's a disagreement. You come up with these remedies and these methods for trying to address what happens at the end. Let me see if I talk about it. Do I talk about? I'll talk about it in a minute. Okay. Questions on that? Great. Transfers. We talked about it in the context of financing. It's really the same thing in a partnership. Who's your partner? Who controls your partner? Right? It's one thing if partner A, it's easy if you're just thinking of people and you say, okay, whatever, Susan owns partnership interest X, Susan can't sell it. That's easy. But that's not ever what we have, right? We've got an LLC that's a partner, and Cullen is in that LLC. Cullen might own 100% of that LLC on day one. What if Cullen wants to bring in investors at an upper tier? So the partners change. Or what if you can imagine, hands, box of partnership, owned by partnership, owned by partnership, owned by corp, owned by funds, investors, right? You can go all the way up and down these chains, and transfers could occur at any level. And what does that mean for your business relationship? Okay. So often you will tie these things to control people, to key persons. You can do whatever you want, but at all times, Neil and Susan and Cullen have to collectively own 51% or more of the entity. Okay. Hang on. Message. Okay. 51% of the entity and control it. Okay. So they can do whatever they want up to. But understanding those provisions and who your partner is really important. You're worried about competitors. You're worried about people with whom we've got bad business relationships. You're worried about their credit if there's future funding. You worry about expertise. You worry about reputation. There's all sorts of things which make you concerned about who your partner is. And in today's day and age, there's OFAC and other governmental requirements about not partnering with, terrorists and such. Okay. So very important to know who your partners are. So transfers is another big provision. And by the way, a breach of the transfer provisions is typically a bad boy act that results in removal of your right to be removed, loss to promote, etc. As I said, some transfers are permitted, transfers to affiliates, no change of control. Let's talk about rights of tags and drags. This is so exciting. Let's talk about tags and drags and rights of first offer and rights of first refusal. Okay. Does anybody know from any of your other classes what a tag or a drag is? Anybody? You see it more in, Holly, please.
Yeah, so I believe that a drag is when you're the majority stockholder and you can drag other minority shareholders to make a sale. And then I think a tag is where you're a minority shareholder and you're able to tag along with the majority when they want to sell.
It's exactly right. So again, to take a half a step back, you typically are not selling, absent a reason, you're typically not selling shares or equity interests, LLC interests in an LLC in the real estate world.
That's the only circumstance I know it in.
No, you're answering it right. I'm saying, so we negotiate these provisions, but typically, if you want to sell the asset, you're selling the asset. You're not selling it by necessarily selling the equity interests in the company that owns the asset, but you could. And so you'll negotiate these provisions that are exactly what Holly just said, which is if capital partner, for whatever reason, notwithstanding what I just said, thinks that the right exit here is to sell the shares in the LLC, okay, you can force the 10% partner to go along, okay? And so that's the drag. I can drag you along with me. And the 10% partner says, wait a minute, if you're selling your 90% interest, because I don't really have control over your transfer provisions, because you're the 90% partner, you didn't really give me very much protection, that's fine, but I don't have to stay in the deal and be a partner with somebody else. I can tag along, okay? So that's a drag and a tag. Drag, the majority partner can make the minority partner go along with the sale, and vice versa on a tag, the tagging partner gets to go along. And there's some complexity there, okay? Anybody want to answer the question as to how much money, let's say there's a drag, how much money, how do you figure out how much money the minority partner gets for going along with the sale? Like, what's their share of the consideration? How is that going to be determined? Simple, typical real estate JV, 90-10, the price paid to the capital partner is $100, okay? You're going to get your buyer to now buy 100%, so they're going to pay a little more. How would you just conceptually, forget the math, conceptually value how much the capital partner gets and how much the operating partner gets? Okay. And it's this, and we've already answered it twice in the last 30 minutes. Anybody?
Their percentage of ownership in the deal?
That's not going to quite work. Burke.
It's similar, but would you run it through the waterfall?
Yeah, you say, if the asset were sold, you figure out, you know what they're paying for the equity. You figure out what that means, their value of the asset, okay, right? Because there's debt. The equity is not what the asset's worth. The asset could be worth, the equity you might be only selling for $10, but there's a $90 mortgage, so the asset's worth $100, right? If you sold it for $100 and paid off the mortgage of $90, there's $10 left. You figure out what the asset's worth, and then you run the hypothetical waterfall. What would each of you get? Because that partner has a promote. That's the okay. And I got to drag. Next, ROFOs and ROFers. Rights of first offer and rights of first refusal. Anybody know what those are? I haven't talked about them. Right of first offer. Dear partner, come up in any context. Let's just say it relates to the purchase of an asset. Your partner has a ROFO to buy the asset. That means the following. Daniel, please.
I was going to say for right of first refusal, I know what that is.
Well,
that's like if they get an offer, you get a right to match it first.
That's right. Thank you. So right of first offer is a little different. Partner A goes to partner B and say, I think I want to buy the asset. I think it's worth $100. Partner B says, I think it's worth more. We're going to sell it. We're just going to go to the market and sell it. I don't want to sell it for $100. I think it's too low. And you go to the market, and lo and behold, it's not worth, you can't sell it for more. Okay. So then you have to go back to the partner who made the offer for 100 and sell it to them for the 100. Okay. So it's a chance to set a floor before you go to market. Option 2, the right of first refusal, is just what Daniel said. You go to market, the partner makes no offer. You go to market, you establish a price, you negotiate a purchase contract or whatever, you get an offer you want to accept, and then you go to the other partner and say, okay, the market says it's worth 110, you want to buy it for 100. Okay? Which do you think is more challenging to the marketing and sale process from the perspective of the person that's trying to sell the asset? Which is a worse, of those two, which is worse from that perspective? Jacob Mitchell.
Right of first refusal is worse for the seller because the market is going to factor in the fact that they might not get the deal.
Yeah, if everybody knows that there's this right of first refusal, who's going to give you their best price? They're sharpen their pencils the most, right? Because they may do all this work, do all their due diligence, bid situation, spend all this time and money, and they know someone can just take the deal away from them, right? After they do all the work to establish the price. So a right of first refusal is not great. It's not great. It's not a great way to selling an asset that's subject to a right of first refusal with a real counterparty. I mean, you see them in leases a lot. And everybody knows that they're not going to exercise their rights of first refusal, but you don't really know, but you presume and guess and assume, to use a lot of words that sort of say the same thing. So you see them, but typically you'd much rather have a whispered offer first, not have the market know that that somebody can just match their price. It's still a problem because if the prices are too low, you can't sell. And so someone's still going to do a bunch of work, even though they might be the highest price, they might not get the deal. Okay. So that's a ROFO versus a ROFR. Okay. By the way, just because it's on the bullets here, the second to last bullet. Remember I said you have to go back to the right of first offer person if it's not, you didn't sell for 100. Typically, really, you could sell it for a little less. Like there's some leeway to give the seller authority. Look, you said 100. It was pretty close. I can still sell to the third. So you might see 95 or 98% of the offer. Sometimes you see 100. ROFOs and ROFRs. Okay, great. Questions on those? Excellent. Tying it all together, buying your partners out maybe triggers remember we talked about the complicated change of control provisions and transfer provisions in loan documents? Well, maybe buying your partner out of the deal requires lender consent. So if you were just buying them out of the deal under one of the provisions we talked about, even for a bad act, right? Maybe you need to go engage with your lender. Maybe the operating partners put up the bad boy guarantee. Hope we all remember bad boy guarantees. Well, think about if you're the operating partner and you put up the bad boy guarantee and you're getting bought out of the deal, what are you raising? What do you have to have happen? It's easy because I'm actually reading it right in front of the slide in front of us. Some bonus points, whoever can read quickest. John, go ahead.
Lender consent.
Well, lender consent and something else too. Really, right?
The permitted transfer, the replacement guarantee, or yeah, I mean.
Oh, you think, I guess it's easy. You're the operating partner. You put up a guarantee to the lender, a bad boy guarantee that you owe money if anything bad happens, lying, cheating, and stealing. You're not in the deal anymore, right? The last thing you want to have happen is somebody lies, cheats, and steals 2 years from now, and the lender sues you under the guarantee, right? You've got to be released from that guarantee for things that happen after you're bought out, right? It all ties together. So it's got to be a permitted transfer. The person that's coming in the deal needs to be approved. Okay. And if consent's needed, it's got to be obtained. And whoever's leading really wants to make sure that they are released from their guarantees. Excellent. Questions? Other items. Fees. There's a lot of fees that get paid to partners in deals. So, for example, maybe your operating partner, in addition to the promote, in addition to their little itty bitty capital that they're putting in, wants an acquisition fee every time, or for the deal that you're closing on one deal, they want to get paid $500,000 for bringing the deal. Maybe they want to get fees for managing construction or managing development, 4 or 5% of costs, hard costs, meaning cost of construction, not architect's fees and soft costs, financing fees, but cost of labor and materials. Okay. Maybe they want an asset management fee. They're going to provide assets. They're going to supervise the third-party property manager, but they're going to provide strategic guidance, market analysis, and they want a fee for that. And so, as you all think about being a business person for a minute, you might look at all those fees and say, it's kind of weird that my operating partner is putting in $2 million and getting a promote. It's a $100 million deal. It's a 98-2 deal. They're putting $2 million in. They're going to get a big promote. And when I look at all the fees they're getting over the next 2 years, they're going to be getting $2 million in fees back. And so pretty quickly, I've got an operating partner with no skin in the game, right? No money at risk. Everybody's not familiar with the phrase skin in the game. I don't really know where that phrase came from. Now that I'm saying it out loud, it's kind of a weird phrase. I wouldn't have skin in it. I want skin anyway. But that's what it means. So you look at these fees and the totality of the fees relative to the investment, and maybe, just maybe, you think they're too rich because I'm losing alignment, right? Everybody talks about alignment. You want everybody to be having the same motives, right? You see, and the promote creates disalignment. Operating partners like to sell quickly because IRRs are lower. I mean, the IRR threshold is not there, but the money to achieve the IRR is lower. So the capital, 1 second, John. So the capital partner says, I want a minimum multiple. Or the operating partner says, I want to sell after 5 years to protect the promote. Those are all ways in which the parties are not aligned. And once you're not aligned, fees makes you unaligned. Then people don't view the business plan necessarily the same way. And people aren't necessarily making decisions necessarily for what's best for the asset. They're making decisions for what's best for their own economics. John.
Oh, I was just going to say on the skin in the game point, I think it comes from horse racing originally. If you're the owner of a horse.
Keep going. How does it tie together?
If you're the owner of the horse, you have the quote unquote like skin in the game, apparently.
All right. That sounds like that's like a Wikipedia or something you just pulled up.
Pretty much something like that.
All good. Oh, thank you. I don't, that's an interesting phrase. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. Other provisions. Who remembers what a clawback means in the context of the promote? Anybody? Last week? Ed?
Well, we were talking about it in the context of multiple assets and how if you might have a certain rate of return on one asset, but when we're talking about it as an entire portfolio, it's lower, then you get the promote back, you would claw it back.
Yeah, said, that's right. Thank you. You're totally right. Said very simply, there can be circumstances, the portfolio example is a good one, where you've overpaid promote to your partner. Big deals, huge deals, successful deals early on, bad deals, expensive deals later on. when you look back at the whole thing, you overpaid promote early on, and and at the end of the day, they got more money than they're supposed to. And so you provide for a clawback. We talked about that last week. You might want that guaranteed so that you have a claim against an entity with credit, not just the SPE that's receiving the promote that really can't pay it back. So these provisions are just looking potentially for guarantees. You might want to guarantee a clawback. Sometimes you see a guarantee of your obligation to fund capital. I would say that that's unusual. And the third one would be cost overruns. So I don't remember, did we talk a lot about cost overruns? I think we did. Did we talk about cost overruns last week? Nod, yes, no. How we pay them? Holly, did we talk about cost overruns last week?
I feel like we would have talked about it very briefly if we had.
Right. So cost overruns are, again, when you have your development partner, who's your expertise, you may say to them, I think we did. You may say to them,
yeah, we did.
Yeah, you're responsible. So those have to get paid. So sometimes you want a guarantee that that partner will actually pay those costs. Okay. Let's talk about dispute resolution. You know, one thing we talked about is, this is an interesting negotiation. We talked about if there's a bad act, you can remove the operator. But what if there's a dispute? So there's only two choices. I think you stole money. I think you committed fraud. Okay. You disagree. I did no such thing. Okay. So now we have one of two things. Either the operating member can stay in control while the capital partner and the operating member litigate for 5 years, or the capital partner can take over and the operating member has to sue, and and they lost their promote, but what if the thing's successful? How do they get the money? And so there's real challenges around disputes as to whether these bad acts have occurred. And so what you often see if people focus on it, and they don't always focus on it, but if they do, and they should, you will sometimes see, look, I can't have you running my deal anymore if I think you've committed fraud. But what we'll do is we'll go through a expedited arbitration. I'm removing you. We'll set you to the side. We'll go through an expedited arbitration process, 6 months, call it 3 to 6 months. During that time, you don't get to make decisions, but any distributions that would otherwise be distributed, we're going to take what would have gone to you as promote, and we'll just set it aside until the arbitration is resolved. And if it turns out I'm wrong and you didn't do the bad act, then you're reinstated. Any monies you otherwise would have gotten, you get, and you can once again be the operating member of the partnership. And if it turns out the arbitration takes my side, then that's my money. You've lost your promote, and it's as if I kicked you out on day one, sort of from a promote perspective, economically going backwards. Neither answer, by the way, is perfect, but it's a difficult situation. Holly.
When does this ever happen in practice where the operating, after arbitration, the operating partner, it's actually, they didn't do anything wrong? I would just think that the relationship would have devolved just so much at that point, if there's accusations of fraud or something.
You're 100% right, and I've never seen it. Okay. But because the consequence to the operating partner is so extreme, they don't want to lose their promote, to be subject to a buyout at a discount, and all these other rights we talked about, in the event they're legitimately disputing whether or not the fact happened. Now, typically people don't worry about it because most of this stuff is going to be obvious. Did you steal money? Were you convicted of a felony involving breach of trust? Okay. It's not necessarily going to be that unclear whether the act happened. But there are other ones that are grayer. Did you make a major decision without getting consent? Well, I got consent. I didn't give you consent. Well, I sent you the email. Yeah, but the email wasn't complete. I thought you were asking about this. No, I was asking about that, the very matter at risk. See, it says this here. I didn't read it. So there are some, you can imagine ways in which there are legitimate disputes, but I've never seen it. Never seen it. I've seen partners not get along, but I've never seen that happen. Great question. Good to be practical. Other provisions in a joint venture, we talked a little bit about. Someone's got to prepare books and records, tax returns. Okay. Someone has to be what's called I think it's now called the partnership representative. It used to be called the tax matters partner. You're required to identify who has the authority to engage with the IRS in the event of an audit effectively. So you have to identify who that partner is. It's typically going to be the capital partner in the 90-10 scenario. But someone has to prepare books and records, tax returns, reporting, right? One of the big obligations of the operating partners is the reporting. How much money do we make? What does the balance sheet look like? What is the income statement for the last month? What does it look like year to date? What are variances to budget? Who's preparing the budget every year? Okay. So let's talk about a budget. I think we didn't talk quite enough about budget and business plan. It's really, really, really critical, right? It guides everything. You've seen me mention it a few times. Really, really important that those are prepared and thought through. Anybody want to take a stab at what happens if you can't agree on it? You know, you're 3 years in and you can't agree on the next year's budget. And let's say the capital partner can't dictate this point. What do you think happens? Everyone take a guess? What you might do? It's common sense, kind of. Let's see. Neil.
You just roll over the last year's budget, maybe with some inflation adjustment of the sort.
So for sure, you definitely would. That's definitely part of it. 100% correct. Roll it over with some CPI. What other adjustments might you make? Think about different kinds of costs. So some costs are not controllable, right? You can't really help it if it snows more than it's supposed to, and so you have to clear the parking lot, right? That isn't really within the control of the operating partner. So you might also adjust to use actuals for just uncontrollable costs, but you still need a budget. So if you can't agree, you'll see that kind of provision. There's tax allocation. So a big chunk of a joint venture, 4 or 5 pages, relates to how, remember, you're a pass-through entity. So income from the property, rent, income, taxable income has to be allocated to the partners. In a simple 90-10 JV with no promote, it would just go 90-10. 90% of the income would go to partner A and 10% would go to partner B. But that's the simplest and most atypical example. So you allocate to comply with partnership tax rules and substantial economic effect, okay? And I wouldn't get into that with the folks on the Zoom today, but having a tax lawyer review those allocations so that as much as possible, taxes will follow cash to maintain people's business deal. You'll see confidentiality, lack of, no one wants publicity. I don't want anybody to announce that we're partners. When we sell the asset, I don't want anybody to say what we sold it for, right? Everyone is worried about being in the paper. No one wants any, a bunch of the private equity shops, not that this would have prevented it, but there was a bunch of bad press, I think on the John Oliver show 3 years ago when they owned a lot of manufactured housing communities and concerns about how some of the unscrupulous ones were taking advantage of residents, right? Private equity shops don't ever want them. They never want to be in the paper. So you'll see confidentiality, you'll see reps and warranties around your ownership of the interest, your OFAC compliance, AML, that sort of stuff. Boilerplate stuff in the back. Okay, so that's really it. Questions from the group? Anything we talked about last week or this week? Anybody want to run through something? John?
Oh, I was just going to ask on this last point of regulatory provisions, what regulatory provisions end up coming up the most? I mean, I imagine like foreign investors are much more likely to like engage in these sort of joint ventures rather than like pension funds, or am I wrong?
Yeah, no, pension funds, well, first of all, pension funds typically don't invest directly. So you're not wrong. They will typically invest through a private equity, through an opportunity shop, like an opportunity fund, a private equity real estate fund, who raises pension fund money, pools it together, and then invests in one of these deals. So they don't typically invest directly, but they are quite exposed to the space. But go ahead with your question. What are people?
So I mean, specifically, it was that like what, like I could, like which of these regulatory provisions do you think is like more represented? And so my basic question was that I see, more foreign money on a certain basis being invested in like real estate in the United States versus like, pension funds, which would be subject to ERISA. So would you say like, and those first three kind of just allude to that. So would you
I would say that pension funds invest quite a bit in real estate. They will do so in a way that allows them to not have unrelated business taxable income. But this is a really important point globally. Maybe you didn't even realize you were getting at it. Depending on who your investor is, there may be all sorts of structuring in joint ventures to comply with their needs and requirements. So if you've got offshore investors, somewhere in the system is going to have to be either a REIT or a blocker corp up above so that they're investing through a corp because they don't want to be investors in the United States because of FIRPTA and because of tax returns. They don't want to file. So that's one. If you're a REIT, you have to have a REIT, and if you need to operate as a REIT, whether it's for offshore investor or otherwise, you're gonna have additional layering structuring requirements. In all cases, you're gonna probably see reps around compliance with OFAC related reps and warranties and anti-money laundering requirements. But who your investors are will dictate some of these provisions. Some of them, for sure. Good question. So look, I think assignment 4 is going to be sort of answering some specific questions in a JV context. And hopefully it'll be straightforward and for everybody. But really at this point, right, you've talked about, hopefully you understand our terminology. Talked about that in class. You understand that real estate is not a practice of law per se. It's not a type of law. It's really a type of product. And you can see we've got all this contract law, right? Regulatory law, tax law, environment, all these different laws, we have to have familiarity with to properly advise on a real estate transaction. And, purchase and sale agreements are a large contract that you'll be involved in. Financing is a really big deal. And joint ventures, aggregating capital, is a huge chunk of what it means to practice real estate law. That is how real estate investments get made. Parties come together all the time and create either simple or complicated relationships. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm doing one right now to buy distressed hotel assets. I'm doing one right now to buy ground up development in self-storage space. Doing one right now to buy self-storage assets that are already developed. Did one not very long ago to buy student housing around the country, right? Doing one now to buy large studios around the world, okay? So they can be complicated, they can be straightforward, they can have lots and lots of complicated waterfalls and tiers of promote. They can have multiple partners. We haven't even really gotten into the complexities you can imagine. We briefly talked about it, of layered partnerships, one sitting on top of another and making sure they integrate together, making sure the financing works well together. But a purchase, a financing, and a joint venture for a single deal is sort of like basic 101 for real estate. So you've now Learned at least a little bit about all of them. Questions? Yes, Jacob.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about JVs where one partner brings non-cash contributions. So say somebody brings land and how that impacts the equity structure and who pays for like transfers and taxes and whether that gets rolled into the equity.
So at some level, there's no difference. It's value, not cash, it's value. I would say, so the basic answer to your question is almost nothing's different. You've got to value the land. Your capital contribution will be whatever is the agreed upon value for that land is. Okay. And maybe you're pulling some money out. So if you're putting in a $100 million piece of land and you're supposed to be 20% of the deal, somewhere along the lines, you're supposed to get 80 million bucks. So money can come in and come out. The biggest difference, which isn't really your question, but is true, is very often when someone is contributing something like land, there's a real disagreement as to what that land's worth. And so what you'll see, to add some complexity, you think the land's worth $40 million. I think it's worth $30 million. Here's what we're going to do. You're only going to get credit for $30 million. But if the deal is successful, I earn my 15 IRR in addition to your promote or before your promote. We're going to have a tier in the waterfall that just says, you land partner get 20 million bucks. Right? You were right. I was wrong. It really was worth, because we earned so much money on the deal. The land was worth more, right? The land's going to be worth the amount of money you can make on the deal at the end, right? So the land has a value based on the ultimate value of the asset. So that's a way to cut a deal where you can't agree on the cost of the land, the value of the land, by putting an extra tier in the waterfall that says, if I've earned a 20 IRR here, I'll pay you an extra 20 million bucks for it. Otherwise, it's generally simple. Transfer tax paid, probably borne by the venture, but it could be borne by either party. It'll just be a negotiation. Good question. Others? Okay, great. Right on time today. Thanks, everybody. Next week, we'll figure out something fun and exciting. That'll be my homework for the next few days. And it'll probably be a combination of what I talked about. And I look forward to seeing you all then. Last class. Thanks so much for your time.
I just have one last question. When do you think we'll receive the assignment for this next week?
A good question. It was emailed to me by my assistant earlier today. I have to look at it. Very likely tomorrow.
Oh, I just asked because, with the exam period and everything, just trying to allocate.
Oh, tell me. Yeah, it'll be probably the next day. When did the exam start?
In about a week and a half. That's when the exam period starts.
Yeah. This will be done before that.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Let's make sure we talk about that tomorrow, okay? Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Professor.